All right, so learning English faster, that's the dream, right? But life these days, well, it's busy for everyone.
It really is.
The good news is you don't need to become a hermit or anything to become fluent.
Right, you don't need to totally revamp your life.
For today's deep dive, we're looking at a really interesting approach that actually compares learning English to climbing a mountain.
Exactly, it uses that analogy.
Eh,
And you wouldn't try to climb Everest in one giant leap, would you?
Definitely not. But I feel like that is how a lot of us think about learning a new language.
Mhm.
Like we expect these huge leaps in progress, when really it's those small, consistent steps that get you there.
That's what our source emphasizes, the power of those small, consistent steps.
Right, like a runner, they don't start out running a marathon.
Exactly. They gradually build up their endurance, starting with just a few minutes each day, and over time, they can eventually conquer that marathon.
Each step might seem small, insignificant even, but when they all come together, it's amazing what you can achieve.
The cumulative effect, that's what matters.
So it's about breaking the process down into manageable chunks.
Yeah, kind of like when a student is studying to be a doctor.
Oh, good example. They don't try to memorize the entire textbook at once.
They take it chapter by chapter, step by step, until they master the material.
So how do we apply that same idea to learning English, especially when we are all so busy?
Well, that's where the 5-minute rule comes in.
Okay, tell me more.
The idea is that instead of getting overwhelmed trying to find big chunks of time, you focus on those little pockets of time that we all have throughout the day.
I like that.
5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, it all adds up.
Like waiting for your coffee to brew or standing in line at the grocery store.
Exactly. Or even just taking a short break from work. Those little moments can really make a difference.
It's true. It's amazing how much those seemingly insignificant moments add up when you use them intentionally. But finding those 5 minutes consistently, that's sometimes easier said than done.
Oh, for sure. Life happens, things get in the way. But what this source is saying is that it's not really about finding extra time.
It's more about using the time you already have differently.
Exactly. It's about making small tweaks to your routine, turning those everyday activities into learning opportunities. Like, for example, let's say you already listen to music or podcasts during your commute.
Yeah, most people do.
Why not switch to English content?
I love that. You're still listening, but you're also passively absorbing the language.
Right. It's like learning on autopilot.
But let's be real. Passively listening to English is not necessarily going to help us with our speaking skills.
True. You're not going to become fluent just from listening.
And speaking is usually the goal for most people learning English.
Definitely. But there's a crucial element here that our source points out that I think a lot of people miss.
What's that?
It's about turning those small actions, that 5 minutes here and there, into habits.
Okay, habits. I like where this is going.
They actually tell a story about a guy named Alex. He was super busy, had a demanding job, but he managed to learn English by dedicating just 15 minutes each day to focused practice.
Wow. That's really inspiring. So the key is consistency, not just finding the time.
That's exactly it. But how do you actually turn those little bits of practice into habits?
That's a great question. I know myself, it's one thing to say I'm going to do something every day, but actually doing it, that's the hard part.
It is, but our source breaks it down into 3 key steps. The first step is starting small.
Okay, I can get behind that. Small and manageable.
Right. Commit to something you can actually do every single day, even if it's just 5 minutes.
5 minutes of vocabulary review, I could probably manage that.
Exactly. Or listening to a short English podcast.
Perfect. That's totally doable.
So that's the first step. Start small. The second step is to choose the same time each day.
Like setting an alarm.
Exactly.
Make it part of your routine.
That's it. It's like brushing your teeth. You do it at the same time every day without even thinking about it.
So starting small and doing it at the same time each day. That makes a lot of sense. So what's the third step?
Well, the third step is to use a habit tracker.
Okay, what's that?
It's basically just a way to visually track your progress.
Like a calendar.
It could be as simple as that, or a fancy app, or even just a notebook.
I see.
The point is to see how many days in a row you've done your English practice. It can be really motivating, especially when you start to see a chain of successful days.
I can see that. It's like a visual reminder of your commitment.
Mm.
So we've got starting small, choosing the same time each day, and using a habit tracker. Those are 3 really practical steps. But what about some specific examples? Like, what are some habits we can actually try to fit into our routines?
Sure, there are tons of possibilities. The source recommends using your morning coffee time for vocabulary practice.
I like that.
Maybe using flashcards or a language learning app.
That's a good one.
Another suggestion is to spend a few minutes before bed just jotting down your thoughts in English.
Ooh, I like that too.
It's a good way to practice writing and kind of reflect on your day.
Yeah, and it's a relaxing way to end the day. Those are great examples, and I bet you could even combine them with those 5-minute pockets we talked about earlier.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, if you're waiting for the bus, you could squeeze in a few flashcards.
Exactly.
But let's be real, motivation can be a bit of a roller coaster, right? What happens when we hit those inevitable slumps?
That's so true. Motivation comes and goes.
What do we do then?
Well, our source talks about the importance of remembering your why.
Your why. Okay.
Why are you learning English?
Right.
When you have a clear purpose or reason that's meaningful to you, it's a lot easier to stay committed.
That makes sense. Having a strong reason behind your goal.
Yeah, it helps you push through those tough moments.
Like it gives you that extra push when you need it.
Exactly.
But sometimes even a really strong why isn't enough, you know?
I know what you mean.
What else can we do to keep that motivation going?
Well, the source also suggests rewarding yourself for reaching milestones.
Ooh, I like that.
It doesn't have to be anything big.
Like a little treat.
It could be a small treat.
Or a new book.
Maybe a new book in English, or even just taking a moment to acknowledge your achievement.
Just being proud of yourself.
Exactly. Those little rewards can really reinforce that positive behavior.
I love that, making the process enjoyable.
And acknowledging your progress.
It's not just about the end goal.
Right, it's about the journey.
That's great advice. But I'm guessing it's not always smooth sailing, right? There are going to be challenges along the way.
Oh, definitely. Learning a new language is never easy.
So how do we deal with those roadblocks when they pop up?
That's a great question, and luckily our source addresses some of the most common challenges.
And I'm guessing they offer some solutions too.
They do.
Let's hear it.
So one of the biggest challenges people face is, of course, lack of time.
The classic time crunch.
Right, but remember, we talked about this earlier, it's not about finding extra time, it's about being smart with the time you already have.
Repurposing those little pockets of time.
Exactly. We talked about using commutes for listening, but even those moments when you're just scrolling through social media
Oh, I'm so guilty of that.
or waiting for an appointment, those can become mini learning sessions.
Okay, so how do you suggest turning those mindless scrolling moments into something productive for language learning?
The source actually recommends a really simple but powerful tweak.
I'm intrigued.
Change the language settings on your phone and social media to English.
Well, they're clever.
You're already spending that time on your device, so why not make it work for your language goals?
It's like subtle immersion, right?
Exactly.
I like that a lot.
It's a small change, but it can make a big difference.
Okay, that's a good one. But I think another big challenge for a lot of people is the fear of making mistakes.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when it comes to speaking.
You're putting yourself out there.
It can feel really scary.
I know I've definitely felt that anxiety before.
Well, the source really emphasizes that mistakes are a normal part of learning.
They are. Everyone makes them.
It's how we improve.
It's true. But it's still hard to shake that feeling sometimes.
I know, but instead of seeing mistakes as failures, try to see them as opportunities to learn.
It's a mindset shift.
It is, and it takes practice.
Do they offer any practical tips for actually overcoming that fear and speaking more confidently?
They do. One of the things they suggest is to record yourself speaking English.
Ooh, that sounds scary.
It might feel awkward at first, but listening back to yourself can help you identify areas where you can improve.
And you get more comfortable hearing your own voice.
Exactly. You can also try something called shadowing.
Shadowing, what's that?
It's basically mimicking native speakers from audio or video clips.
Oh, I've heard of that. You try to copy their pronunciation and intonation.
Exactly. It's a great way to improve your fluency and your accent.
So it's about practice, practice, practice.
And building that confidence.
Even if it's just in private at first.
Exactly.
But what about forgetting vocabulary?
Ah, the dreaded forgetting curve.
I feel like I learn new words, and then a week later, they're gone.
It's so frustrating.
It is.
Well, our source has a solution for that. It's called the 5X review method.
Okay, tell me more.
It's basically reviewing new material 5 times, but at increasing intervals.
Like spaced repetition.
Exactly. So you review it 1 day after learning it, then 3 days later, then 7 days, then 14 days, and finally a month later.
So you're constantly reinforcing those neural pathways.
Right. It helps those words stick in your long-term memory.
I love that strategy. It makes so much sense. But let's be honest, sometimes even with the best methods, learning can feel a bit boring.
It can.
How do we keep things interesting and avoid burnout?
That's where personalization comes in.
Okay, what do you mean?
Our source recommends finding ways to connect your English learning with your interests.
So like if you love cooking,
Exactly. You could follow English language recipe blogs or watch cooking shows.
or if you're a sports fanatic,
You could dive into English sports news or commentary.
it's about making it relevant to your life.
Right, and turning something you already enjoy into a learning opportunity.
It's like sneaking in those veggies with a delicious smoothie.
I love that analogy.
It's sneaky learning.
It is.
But what about those people who don't have anyone to practice with?
That's a valid point. It can be tough to find a language partner.
Especially if you're not in an English-speaking environment.
Right.
So what do you do then?
Well, our source reminds us that we live in a digitally connected world.
That's true.
There are so many online resources available these days.
Like what?
Language exchange websites, apps specifically designed for language learners, and even online groups where you can connect with other English enthusiasts.
So you can find people to practice with virtually.
Exactly. There's really no excuse for not having someone to practice with.
That's reassuring to hear.
It is, you just have to be a little proactive.
So we've talked about the online world, but what about some offline, unconventional tips?
Oh, I like where this is going.
Anything that goes beyond the typical textbook advice.
They actually suggest something really simple, but it can be super effective.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Label everyday objects in your home with their English names.
Wait, so like sticking a Post-it note on my fridge that says refrigerator?
Exactly.
It sounds a little silly.
It might, but it's a great way to immerse yourself in the language.
And you're constantly seeing those words.
Right. It creates visual reminders.
I kind of love that idea.
They also recommend talking to yourself in English
Talking to yourself.
while you're going about your day.
Okay.
Like describing what you're doing, thinking about your plans, even narrating your thoughts.
So like, I am walking to the kitchen to get a glass of water.
Exactly. It might feel strange at first,
It does sound a little strange.
but it can really help with fluency
And internalizing those grammar structures.
without even realizing it.
It's like creating your own little English-speaking bubble.
I love that.
But even with all these amazing tips, staying motivated in the long run, that's the real challenge, right?
It is. It's a marathon, not a sprint. What's their secret sauce for keeping the momentum going over time? One of the most important things they emphasize is celebrating every small win,
Oh, I love that.
no matter how insignificant it might seem.
Like learning a new word
Give yourself a pat on the back.
or understanding a phrase in a song.
High five.
It's about recognizing those little victories
Exactly. It makes a big difference in maintaining your motivation.
and keeping a positive attitude.
Right. It's not just about the destination. It's about enjoying the journey.
I love that.
So don't be afraid to celebrate those small wins along the way.
So it's like acknowledging each step you take on that climb toward fluency.
Exactly. And speaking of those small steps, they actually offer some advice on making those little pockets of time even more effective.
Oh, I like that. More bang for our buck. What do they suggest?
They talk about the importance of setting clear intentions for each learning session.
Okay, so instead of just passively listening to a podcast, for example.
Right. Instead of just letting it play in the background, set a specific goal. Maybe you want to focus on really understanding the main ideas.
Yeah.
Or maybe you want to try to pick out new vocabulary words.
Or even just pay attention to the speaker's intonation.
Exactly. It's about having a purpose behind each interaction with the language.
So it's like having a mental checklist that keeps you engaged and focused.
That's a great way to put it.
But what about when motivation starts to dip? You know, it's easy to get excited at the beginning, but how do we keep that enthusiasm going, especially when learning English feels like a long-term commitment?
That's a great question, and our source actually highlights the power of community.
Okay, like finding other people who are learning English.
Exactly. Connecting with other learners, either online or in person, can really provide that support and accountability.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders encouraging you along the way.
I love that. And it can also give you a sense of shared purpose.
Yeah, you're all in it together.
Plus, it's a great way to actually practice speaking and get feedback from others on your progress.
Those are great points. It's like having a built-in support system. But sometimes, even with all the support of the world, that little voice of self-doubt can creep in.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. That feeling of not being good enough or thinking you'll never reach fluency.
How do we deal with that?
The source offers a really simple but powerful reminder. Be kind to yourself.
I like that. It's easy to forget that sometimes.
It really is. Learning a language takes time and effort. It's a journey, not a race.
So instead of focusing on perfection, we should celebrate the progress we make.
Exactly. Acknowledge the challenges, of course, but don't forget to enjoy the process.
That's such an important reminder.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. Finding opportunities to actually use English in real-life situations. Do they have any specific recommendations?
They do. They encourage learners to be proactive in creating those opportunities.
Okay, what do they mean by that?
It could be something as simple as ordering your coffee in English, asking for directions in a new city, or even just striking up a conversation with another English learner at a language exchange.
So it's about taking those skills we're developing and actually putting them into practice in the real world.
Exactly. Even if it feels a bit scary at first.
So how do we create those immersive experiences if we don't have the opportunity to travel to an English-speaking country, for example?
They suggest thinking about your everyday environment and finding ways to transform it into a mini English immersion zone.
I like that.
It could be something like watching movies and TV shows in English.
Or listening to music and podcasts in English.
Exactly. Or even reading books and articles. The key is to surround yourself with the language as much as possible
It's about making English a natural part of your daily life.
and bridging that gap between the classroom and the real world.
With all these strategies combined, I bet the progress can be pretty amazing.
It really can. Our source really emphasizes that even small, consistent actions can lead to significant results over time.
It's like those little steps we talked about at the beginning, the ones that eventually get you to the top of the mountain.
That's a perfect way to put it. The most important thing is to take that first step and then keep nurturing those English skills with dedication and a positive attitude.
I love that. Well, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive for today.
Sounds good.
We've covered so much ground, from those small steps and habit formation to overcoming those common challenges and staying motivated.
It's been a great conversation.
It really has. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Of course.
Learning English is about so much more than just acquiring a new skill. It's about opening up a world of possibilities
It's about connecting with people from different cultures and exploring new perspectives.
and expanding your horizons.
So embrace the journey, celebrate every step forward, and never underestimate the power of language.
Couldn't have said it better myself. To our listener out there, take what you've learned today and put it into action.
Start small, stay consistent, and remember, that journey to fluency is yours to create.
Happy learning, everyone.